Hello, 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 my friends. How are you? And welcome to this week's episode of the Retro Ups and Downs, where in this series we are continuing to go through all of the pilot episodes for the various different Star Treks that we haven't previously covered on the Ups and Downs already, asterisks, but actually I'm not going to expand on that for another couple of weeks. I hope you're all having a lovely week this week. I hope that you are doing well. I hope that in the utter insanity of planet Earth at the moment, you are minding yourself and you're taking care of yourself. Now, will you join me all for the ups and downs for Star Trek Voyager Season 1, Episode 1, Caretaker. Just before we start, funny thing, so I watched this on Paramount Plus, the version of Caretaker that's available on the UK and Ireland version of Paramount Plus. So it's been a long time since I've watched Caretaker as a two-parter. But there we are. It is, of course, a feature-length episode, but yep, it's part 1 and part 2 on Paramount Plus. So I guess, welcome to part 1? We get a text scroll very similar to the beginning of Emissary from Deep Space Nine. This gives us a little bit of a reminder of the Maquis. You remember them. They were introduced much earlier. They were in Season 2 of Deep Space Nine. They were in Season 7 of Star Trek Voyager. But they were always intended as a backdoor pilot, sort of, for Star Trek Voyager, which is interesting in many, many ways. But yes, the character of Chakotay, for example, was sort of teased, through associations with Ro-Laren in The Next Generation. And of course, the Maquis themselves, they got quite a bit of screen time in DS9 as well. One thing I love about the opening of this episode, and it's absolutely an up for me, is this confrontation between the Maquis Raider, the Valjean, and the Cardassian Galler-class warship. It just looks great, and obviously it was so much fun to film, and they liked the footage they got so much, that they reuse an awful lot of the footage, particularly with the Cardassian ship, in a lot of Deep Space Nine. It's quite funny, when you've watched DS9 as many times as I have, you start to recognize some of the ship scenes that get used over and over. Yeah, we see this Cardassian ship a lot. On the bridge of the Valjean, we are in sort of rapid succession shown Chakotay, B'Elanna, Tuvok, and, although he doesn't get a name in this episode, Ayala as well. It sets up the stakes are there from the beginning. This Maquis Raider might be fast, but it's probably no match for a Cardassian warship. So their only option is to get into the Badlands. They're flying. They get hailed from Gully-Vec, who actually is doing a bit of a, he's kind of hopping between the different shows. We've definitely seen Yvek before. I like it. Well, I mean, I say I like Yvek. I don't know if we're supposed to like Yvek. It's nice to see a familiar face, even if that face is trying to capture and kill the Maquis. They get into the Badlands, and down for me. This is hardly a controversial one. This is probably the worst that the Badlands ever looks. This sort of pink, soft version of them. I will say, when we get to Star Trek Discovery and they update the Badlands with the technology of the 21st century, but also it's similar to with the galactic barrier. It looks like a storm that might actually do serious damage to your ship. Here, if you're quick and just stay out of the way of those spinny winnies, you're gonna be fine. The Badlands, they knew themselves that it didn't look amazing, which is why the Badlands look different in Deep Space Nine as well. You see, they're much more, there's a browner hue, it's a bit more like there's fire. So yeah, sadly, considering this is our introduction to this new show, unfortunately, the Badlands don't look amazing. To be fair, it was 1995. It's still bloody impressive that they managed to make this. As the Maquis Raider is dipping and dodging in between all of these storms, we see that shot of the Cardassian ship. Their blade gets hit by one of the columns and they get knocked to the side. Keep an eye out. You will see that footage again in several episodes of DS9. So that's the Cardassians taken care of. Happy days, right? Everyone's flying through. We're gonna go, hang on, is that a coherent Tetrion beam by any chance? Uh-oh, there's a displacement wave coming. Things are getting really, really bright. Nah, don't worry about it. I'm sure they're fine. The opening credits sequence. As you know here on TrekCulture, we love particularly Star Trek Voyager's opening credits. Now, you know me, my heart is out in the Denorius belt, but these are undeniably beautiful, beautiful opening credits, and also whopper of an up Jerry Goldsmith. It actually feels like we're doing the movie Ups and Downs again, because as you'll probably remember, every single one of the movies, the composer gets an up. So it's just nice to sort of do that again here. But yeah, Jerry Goldsmith returned to Star Trek. This would have been this would have been obviously before Star Trek First Contact, where he then did First Contact, Insurrection, and Nemesis. But after Generations, where he did not return for Generations, he has a very distinctive sound. And this opening theme is beautiful, it's expansive, it's big. I would argue that the Voyager theme, outside of the main Star Trek march, is possibly the most well-known theme tune from all of Star Trek. And again, it is no coincidence that Jerry Goldsmith is the one who wrote this. It is just absolutely stunning. We go straight in then to the Federation penal colony. Well, I say penal colony, penal camp? It's on New Zealand anyway, possibly making up for the fact that New Zealand was just left out of Star Trek First Contact. But we get our first shot of Tom Paris, who is working away on a thing, and then he looks up to see Kate Mulgrew, hands on hips, playing Catherine Janeway. I'll get into it a little bit in the temporal observations, but I think it's well known at this stage that Kate Mulgrew was not the first choice to play the character who would become Catherine Janeway. Originally, Genevieve Bujold, a French-Canadian actress, was cast in the role of Janeway. One day into filming, in fairness to her, she said, no, it's not for me. And she left. And there was a whole big massive scramble because, we've started filming, we kind of need our lead. And Kate Mulgrew was one of the very few people who was brought back in to read again. And it's to me, it's just bonkers now, like to imagine anyone else playing this role, because Mulgrew is Janeway. Janeway is Mulgrew. She is absolutely perfect in the role. Robert Duncan McNeill, who returns to Star Trek after playing Nick Locarno in the Next Generation episode, The First Duty, is here to play Tom Paris. Now, there is several variations on the story of Tom Paris, all of which I will get into in the temporal observations. Very quickly, Janeway informs Paris that she has a mission for him. This mission will help him when it comes to his next, effectively, parole hearing at the Federation Penal Reserve here. He is to help her track down a Maquis raider that's gone missing in the Badlands. Two reasons. One is they need to catch the Maquis, but also her security officer was undercover on that ship. We get a little bit of the backstory. Paris says, he was basically a bit of a wild child. He didn't get on very well in Starfleet, so he resigned his commission, joined the Maquis, and about 1 week later got caught. It kind of sounds like a string of down on your luck things going wrong. And we do find out a bit later on as well, one of the reasons, the direct reason, that he left Starfleet. Even from this, Paris is someone who wants to be a hero, and things just went wrong for him in several different ways. We also find out that he does know Chakotay, who is of course commanding the Valjean. Paris agrees to go with Janeway, and the next we see he is on board a Type 6 shuttlecraft as it approaches Deep Space Nine and the brand new Intrepid class USS Voyager. He is being flown there by Lieutenant Stoddy. Enjoy what you get of Lieutenant Stoddy, because it's not very much. We get a couple of little bits of just exposition. We learn about bioneural circuitry, we learn about the speed of Voyager. But before we go into Voyager itself, I'm going to take us to Quark's bar. Up for Morn. I don't make the rules. Morn gets an up. Up for Quark. Armin Jimmerman is our handover character in Caretaker. So in Encounter at Farpoint, we had DeForest Kelley playing Admiral McCoy. In Emissary, we had Patrick Stewart playing Jean-Luc Picard. And here, of course, we have Armin Shimerman playing Quark. Arguably, in Where No Man Has Gone Before, and The Man Trap, we had Leonard Nimoy reprising the role of Spock from The Cage. The fact that he stuck around, it still doesn't negate the rules. Quark is being a good host when he's trying to cajole Garrett Wang, Harry Kim, into buying some tokens for his mother back on Earth. And Harry Kim walks right into his trap and he says, "We were warned about Ferengi at the Academy." To be fair, that is a pretty crappy thing to say. So I kind of like, Ferengi. Quark, I've only known his name since 1993. It's kind of funny then to me when Quark goes, "Slurs about my people at the Academy." Yeah, up. Although Quark is playing him like a lute, I agree with the point. Harry is saved by the timely arrival of Tom Paris, who exposes Quark's little gamble here by saying that these precious gemstones can be found on any planet in the system for the equivalent of a Mars bar. So that's the end of Quark's sale and they walk out together. And then, despite what I literally just said, I am going to give an up to Tom Paris for it. Didn't we warn you about Ferengi at the Academy? Good old-fashioned racism. The pair of them check into the beautiful sickbay, of course, on Voyager, where we see the first chief medical officer of the USS Voyager, who is a lieutenant commander. I always like seeing people in head positions who aren't technically the highest rank. I'll come back to this in a second. Anyway, he's a dick. Yeah, he does not like Paris. And although, I'm sort of in two minds here, because he does explain that he was serving in the facility when Paris got into his trouble with the law. He is still very much guilty of prejudice and holding grudges, but I think the way it's explained, I'm not going to give him a pass, but I can understand. Kim and Paris are then very quickly hightailing it out of there because it's time to go and check in with the captain. We then go to the ready room with that bastard mark down. I can't really go into why it's a down until a little bit later on. Mark, you hurt Janeway's heart. I don't like you. To be fair, he thought she was dead. Oh, and he does mind the dog as well. Down to lost love. I'm going to put it that way. In this scene, we get Kate Mulgrew playing effectively two very different ways of the same character. One is where she is so loving and so disarmed, and she says, "Hey, you never bother me, except the way I like to be bothered." All right, Star Trek primetime television, but still, up there for showing this side of Janeway, and then straight away going into Captain Janeway when Harry Kim and Tom Paris enter the ready room. Mr. Kim, at ease before you sprain something. Immortal line, that's an up from me. And then, of course, we get Sir, where she goes, contrary to Federation protocol, I don't like to be called Sir. Ma'am? Ma'am's okay in a crunch, but I prefer Captain. I just love the exchange. And again, it's one of those ones that just stands out from Caretaker as a pilot. Because it's a funny exchange of lines, but also, again, in really, really short time, we are getting our real handle on Janeway as a character. As they walk out into the bridge, there's sort of a bridge of dialogue, if you will. Did you have any problems getting here? No, it was fine. By the way, that bridge up is my favorite bridge. Just throwing it out there, Voyager's bridge is my favorite. I love it. It's so wide. Now, what's funny to me is that it looks like it was designed for widescreen because it is such a wide bridge and you almost never get a complete shot of it in the entire run of Star Trek Voyager because it's so wide. Remember TV screens were effectively 4:3 back in the 90s. So the best you could really hope for is maybe half of the security station across to half of the operations station. And then you'd lose those two science stations at either side. It's like it was effectively filmed thinking, well, we're gonna film it in widescreen and one day there will be streaming and we will do the whole thing in widescreen. And it still feels like a good use of space. It is both sparse and it isn't. There is one thing that has always been... Think of the Enterprise D bridge, and you have the captain's chair flanked by First Officer and most regularly Councillor Troy. Then you go back to Kirk's bridge, well, any of them really, and you have one central captain's chair. Same with the Defiant, but on Voyager, you had two chairs side by side. I don't know what to take from that. They basically always knew that the captain was going to be a woman, but was the suggestion that there had to be always somebody else there? There are only two seats. That's the thing, and the fact that they are equal size. There isn't a captain's chair so much as, well, any chair that Janeway's sitting in is the captain's chair. It was always an interesting decision to me to align it like that, despite everything I just said about being my favorite bridge. I think it looks the best. But I do have to raise a query about that decision. Lieutenant Commander Cavett, is it down? He is a useless first officer. He doesn't get very much to do, to be fair, so we never really got a chance to show off what he can do. But again, like, you might as well all turn around and just slap Paris across the face. Welcome to the ship. Nah, actually, you know what? Not welcome. Nah, screw you and your mother. You know, like, come on, bit of professionalism. But this is also what I was saying about the Chief Medical Officer as a Lieutenant Commander. So is Cavett. I'm just so used to your first officer being a full commander. We get our iconic engage from Janeway as Voyager pulls away from DS9. That shot is absolutely beautiful. Shall we talk about the design of the Intrepid class USS Voyager? I mean, come on. Isn't it pretty? Oh. Rick Sternbach designed a beautiful ship for this series. You can see in it the same logic of the original Enterprise. You've got your saucer section, you've got your drive section, and you've got your two nacelles. It's been flattened and streamlined. You can see in the saucer section what would inspire the Enterprise E, for example. You've got those moving nacelles, which have always been just fun. Overall, Voyager just makes sense. I do actually remember the first time I saw this ship, I was a little bit like, oh, that's a bit different, it's a bit different. But actually, it's so similar, really, when you look at it. It's so immediately identifiable as Starfleet. Now, obviously, as we know, there were several designs along the way for Voyager, and I like where they landed. The original filming concept model with the elongated nacelles is a nice version of the ship, don't get me wrong. But I think they were right to go, that's the one, when they landed on this one. In the mess hall, it's still funny to me to see that wall of replicators, because I'd say most of us have probably seen Voyager at this point. We know that it's not going to stay there for very long. So it always just kind of throws it a little bit. Also, of course, Majel Barrett turning up in the latest Star Trek iteration. Talk about, geez, very much a stamp of approval on a Star Trek. And then you get that, you know, the tomato soup. What kind of tomato soup? Chilled? No, I don't want it chilled. I don't want to. Just give me plain tomato soup. Anyway, crap, they've sat Harry down. Poor old Tom is standing there with his soup in his hand, knowing full well that Harry is being told of his misdeeds from the past. Here is where we sort of diverge from the Locarno inspiration. Locarno was mostly responsible for the death of one cadet, whereas Tom Paris, it's kept vague, but he was responsible for an accident that claimed the lives of 3 officers. He's very gallows humor about it. He was, I was going to hide it, and if I just kept my mouth shut, I would have been scot-free. But in the night, the ghosts of those 3 dead officers came to me, and I had a change of heart. Obviously, not being literal here, but at least this version of this character being played by Robert Duncan McNeil, we learn, is responsible for an accident that claimed somebody's life, but elected to come forward. I've always felt Locarno was backed into a corner. And then when we see things that went on in Lower Decks as well, you really get that feeling. But here, it immediately sets us up with a bit more sympathy for Paris. Plus, I like the reminder of Paris going, they probably told you, make better friends. And Kim goes, I don't need anyone to tell me who my friends are. They reach the Badlands and Voyager flies in. There had been an exchange about look, Federation ships aren't going to do very well in the Badlands. Technically, he's spot on because pretty quickly, what's that? It's a coherent tetryon beam, oopsie daisies, and there's a displacement wave along the way. They try to use a graviton wave to disperse it, that doesn't do anything, and so Janeway says, everybody brace for impact, and Cavett takes a running jump across the bridge. Down, you're an idiot, you deserved it. I'm not apologizing, he was an idiot. The bridge takes a bit of a beating, but don't worry, in true Voyager style, it'll be fine in 5 minutes. There's a lot of green lighting around. It looks very Borgy, actually, which I enjoyed. Also, unfortunately, Lieutenant Stadi has been killed. Thanks for playing Stadi. We get our first shot then of the Caretaker's array. Gorgeous design, always loved it. That's an up from me. Kim says, if these sensors are working correctly, we're over 70,000 light years from where we started. He does not, however, say they're in the Delta Quadrant. He just says they're in the other side of the galaxy. We get a few great scenes in quick succession, particularly of Janeway showing she knows her stuff. Unfortunately, the chief engineer has been killed, and there is a warp core breach at risk. So, straight down to engineering, because she knows what she's about. We also learn that the chief medical officer, there's no response, so Paris and Kim go down to sickbay, and all right, listen, the CMO was maybe a bit of a dick to Paris, but they went all out when they killed him. I mean, if you just pause on that frame, like, hey, kind of incinerated him, but left him just intact enough to know that he probably was in a lot of pain before he died. Okay? We get a shot of Lieutenant Joe Carey in engineering. Nice to see ya. A long and happy life will Joe Carey have with absolutely no strife at all. And don't worry, it's not like just before they make it home. Moving on. Please state the nature of the medical emergency. Robert Picardo arrives as the emergency medical hologram. And here's the thing. When you've seen all of Star Trek Voyager, you see what they do with the Doctor, you see his arc, and you see Robert Picardo's development of said character, you sort of forget how rude everyone is to him in this pilot episode. He gets enough material that he can take sass and sarcasm and throw it into a relatively small part in this episode. You know, things like tricorder, medical tricorder. He is so good. He stands out in the pilot and then, of course, continues to stand out all the way through. Also, keep an eye on what everyone's using because, remember, they've just been flown 70,000 light years away from the Alpha Quadrant. They're all using next generation era phasers and tricorders. This will not last. The array is scanning the ship and the next thing, people start disappearing left, right and center. The EMH goes, I didn't give anyone permission to be beamed out of sickbay. Hello? It seems that somebody has forgotten to terminate my program. Oh. The entire crew finds themselves over on what is clearly like a plantation farm. Yeah, not the most relaxing place in the world. Although I will say credit where credit is due. That's some good banjoing. Taking up for that. Using their TNG era tricorders, they can see that they've only actually transported 100 kilometers, you know, a scant distance of 100 kilometers. I really want a transporter so badly. Anyway, so they know that they're over on the array. They've made sure that all of the crew is accounted for, and Janeway tasks Paris and Kim with investigating the power supply, basically what's going on around them. They can tell everyone's a hologram, but away they go. And also, there's a good boy. Oh, doggo. But yeah, Paris, like, there is some inconsistency. Well, basically, Paris is a bit of a horn dog. The hologram of a very attractive woman is throwing herself at him, and he's like, yeah, listen, I'm gonna have some fun right now. I don't need to do my job. And Kim is kind of like, get your ass over here. And they end up at the barn, and they make the discovery that they do. They find out, hang on, there's only one life form surrounding everyone. Once Janeway and the rest of the away party, well, I don't know, is there an away party if you're kidnapped? But anyway, once they arrive in the barn, and then suddenly the holograms kind of go from really, really welcoming to, we're gonna kill you and your entire family. That's a down for me. It's not consistent with what we learn from the Caretaker. You know, if the Caretaker is the one effectively controlling all of these, it's just a bit like, no, like that That lady with the pitchfork is full on going to stab you. Yeah. Well, although, I wonder, is it because Harry was so rude a moment before, where he says, oh, she's just a hologram. Down! That is a theme that runs through a lot of Voyager, by the way. Rudeness to holograms. Especially, by the way, if a dog is barking at you, you're the one in the wrong. The barn door is revealed to actually be hiding a science lab. You see Tuvok, you see Chakotay and B'Elanna are all lying on beds with a big old needle sticking through their chest. And then we get whoosh whoosh. Everyone is then on their beds and we get that needle stabbing straight through Janeway. Ew. That has always freaked me out, that scene, ever since it first aired. I do not care for it. They wake up again on Voyager, and Mr. Rollins says that they've been gone for 3 days. Paris wakes up in sickbay, and the doctor asks him, sorry, can someone please explain to me what has transpired? Completely ignores him. Take it down. Stop being rude to holograms. They discover that only Harry is missing from the crew. Everyone else has been sent back. Janeway hails the Maquis Raider, which has been sitting beside the Caretaker's array, and she reveals that she knows full well what Chakotay's name is. So, she kind of tips around, yep, we knew we were coming to get you. So he says, why don't you beam aboard? Because they're missing a member of their crew as well, B'Elanna. Ayala, Tuvok, and Chakotay beam onto the bridge of Voyager, and Captain states the obvious. Rollins goes, watch out, they're armed, as all 3 of them are clearly holding phasers. Damn, not needed, come on now. Poor old Chakotay's having a bit of a shock when Tuvok goes, yeah, about the whole working for you thing, I work for her? Cool. We're good, right? Chakotay is understandably a bit miffed by this. Says, what was your mission? Deliver us into their waiting hands? And Tuvok says, my initial mission was to gather as much intel on you as possible, and then indeed deliver you into their waiting hands. Sassy Tuvok is sassy. Taken up. Chakotay then spots Paris on the bridge as well. They know each other. How many syllables can Robert Beltran get into the word Latinum? I love the way he says Latinum in this. Yeah, they're not friends, and he feels that Paris is the one who betrayed the Maquis and then betrayed him again by leading Voyager to catch him. Janeway steps in straight away and says, oi, as a member of my crew, back down. You wouldn't like it if I treated a member of your crew with rudeness. I can just imagine Paris in the background going like, I'm a member of the crew. I feel great right now. Tuvok comes through with a theory saying he reckons there's actually only one entity on the array, and that projection was something like a waiting room meant to pacify the entire crew before the experiments began. Janeway thinks, yes, that is logical. Tuvok says, the only logical action. So what they're going to do is go back over there. Janeway says, break out the compression phaser rifles. She's going to bring Chakotay over as well, because obviously B'Elanna is missing too. Now Paris says, I'd like to come with you. Janeway's like, I kind of don't need you. But she says, I just hate to see anything happen to Harry. And I like straight away, I like where this is going. That is an up for me. Speaking of Harry, he's in a lab. He's covered in lesions, and B'Elanna is there too. He wakes up and there are 2 people smiling down at him, a doctor and another doctor. One of them played by Bruce French, who sadly passed away this year. They're definitely trying to pacify Harry. They're definitely trying to keep him calm, and they want to do the same for B'Elanna, but B'Elanna's not having very much of that. She gets up, she starts breaking noses, and she gets immediately knocked out again. The whole scene is fairly straightforward. It shows the stakes, where they are, and that they are not in control. I like the scene, it's quite well done. Over on the array, they find that banjo player, played by Basil Langdon, is the only one there now. Janeway, she's very much to business. I don't know what you need, and frankly, I don't care. She's about getting her crew back. Up. This will become a theme with Catherine Janeway. The Caretaker, as this is who he is a bit like, oh, get you! Oh yeah, you're a bit uppity for, simple bipedal creatures. Langdon's very good in this scene because he is both engaging with them, but also he has no time for this. So from his point of view, it's like talking to an ant. They say, maybe we could help you. He's like, please, I've scanned the galaxy with technology beyond your comprehension. He's trying to pay a debt that can never be repaid. And he's very down to earth about it. Like, I don't have time. And then he whoosh, sends them away. You definitely get the feeling that you don't want to mess with this guy. Back in the lab with Harry and B'Elanna, B'Elanna wakes up, she's not best pleased to be where she is, and she says, what was Starfleet doing at that array anyway? Harry reveals, we were looking for you, actually. And she's like, oh, you've captured us now. And he's a bit like, oh yeah, consider yourself captured. I know I have a phaser here somewhere. She doesn't find it funny. I see both sides here. It was a little bit funny. She asks about the marks that are growing on them, and she's slamming on the door, and he's like, hey, do you want to get sedated again? Down for a bit of forced exposition here. She's like, you're right, Starfleet. It's the Klingon half of me. I can't control it. Bit forced. We do the exchange of names. What's your name, Mackie? She calls him Starfleet, but then we learn Harry Kim, B'Elanna Torres, and the Doctor returns and says, you're not prisoners here. You're honored guests. Outside in the complex, which is gorgeous, by the way, they're walking through and the Doctor explains, we don't actually know what's wrong with you. We know that the Caretaker sent you to us, and we know that you have those growths, but we don't really know what those growths are. We get that gorgeous shot of the underground facility that we'll just call them what they are, the Ocampa, that they live in. But he also says, we've been here for something like 500 generations, which is actually quite funny when you then learn how long the Ocampa live. It's not quite as long as it sounds. I mean, if a generation is 9 years, still longer than I'm gonna live, but it's like, okay. We get the quick revelation that there have been others who've been sent to the Ocampa throughout time with those same growths, but also none of them survived. So really what they're doing is trying to keep them comfortable as much as possible. Now, Kim and Torres reckon our crews will be looking for us, but that's not exactly fabulous news to hear. I like their threads though. I kind of like the clothes they give them. They seem drab, but they actually look really comfortable. At 41 minutes and 33 seconds into Star Trek Voyager, we get our first captain's log. The pulses that have been fired from the Caretaker's array, they've traced them to a planet in a nearby system, the 5th planet, in fact. Tuvok informs Janeway that the pulses are speeding up. The planet they discover is completely barren. There are no nucleogenic particles in the atmosphere, which basically means they can't make rain. There's no oceans, there's no large bodies of water. They're frankly a little bit stumped as to what's going on with this planet. Then we get one of my favorite scenes in the episode, which is this exchange between Tuvok and Janeway. Tuvok says, Captain, you require sleep. And she reveals to Tuvok that before they left, Harry Kim's mother contacted her to say he'd left his clarinet behind. Would she have time to send it to him? And then she says, did you know he played clarinet in the Juilliard Youth Symphony? Just this little scene shows how much she cares about her crew. It is an up from me. She then goes on to say, I need to do that. I need to take more time to get to know the crew. I have to get them home. Up, right there from the beginning. Tuvok counters with, the crew will not benefit from the leadership of an exhausted captain. Hard to argue with that logic. It's an up. I love the way they speak to each other. I love their relationship. Tim Russ and Kate Mulgrew absolutely sell that these two characters have known each other a very long time. Just before the scene ends, she says, I spoke to your family before we left. They're worried about you. And he says, no, they're not. And she goes, they miss you. And he says, as I do them. Oh, and then, funnily saying this, part 1 ends. So yeah, if you're watching this as an like a feature-length episode, the scene just ends. But yeah, this will be the end of Caretaker Part 1 on Paramount Plus UK and Ireland. Part 2, first person we meet, Ethan Phillips as Neelix. In defense of Neelix, right? I really like him in the pilot. Oh, Neelix is, I think, an unfairly maligned character. And, you kind of have to go into a little bit of temporal observations to explain why. Some bits worked really well, some bits didn't. Some bits, I think, were great on paper, but then when it came to writing an ongoing series, they became a bit stretched, a bit thin. A lot of the things I really like about Neelix here in the pilot, they sort of vanish again. So it's not like he's a different character or anything, but yeah, I do like, this is my waste zone, what are you doing here? Janeway says, I've no interest in your waste zone. And he's like, oh, well, then I'm delighted to meet you. I like that. There's no kind of posturing or anything like that. She says, I'm Captain Catherine Janeway of the Federation Starship Voyager. And he says, that is a very impressive title. I've no idea what any of it means, but it's very impressive. Oh. She asks if he knows anything about the array. He says, I know enough to stay away from it. He says, let me guess, you've been whisked across from another part of the galaxy. And she says, yes, you've seen this before. And he says, oh, thousands of times. Well, hundreds of times. Maybe 50. I like it. There's just an ease to him. And as well, I just love the fact that, every single behind the scenes story when talking about Johnny Phillips, as they call him, Ethan Phillips to the credits, they'll say what a lovely guy he is. And he's just funny and should be a stand-up comedian. I think he really sells Neelix here. He's invited to come aboard because he knows about the Ocampa and he knows about the 5th planet. So there is something he could probably do for them in exchange for something like maybe water? Jamie says, you can have all the water you want. Okay, right, step back, we'll beam you aboard and tow your ship in. He's like, beam? And then he's beamed over. And you know what? I like it. And I love how he says to Tuvok, you Federations. Because that makes sense. I mean, he has no context for that. Tuvok goes, the Federation is a, collective of different species. I am a Vulcan. Nice to meet you, and throws his arms around him. Up. Just as they're walking out of the transporter room, Tuvok just goes, perhaps you would care for a bath? A what? Up. When you then learn that Vulcans have extra sensitive olfactory receptors, poor Tuvok. Then later, Tuvok arrives at the guest quarters where Neelix is. He lets himself in, and we realize that, once you understand about replicator rations, Neelix has used something like a year's worth of replicator rations for his lunch, which is just hilarious. There's just water and water and water, so much food. He's in the bath, everything is steamed up, and you could tell from the jump that they were going to be a good double act. And I'm sad to say that there wasn't enough of that going through Voyager with the two of them together, because I generally like every scene that has Tuvok and Neelix together. They're so good. I wonder, what if they fuse them into like one character? Wouldn't that be really, really funny? We get more bits of sassy Tuvok, and then he holds up the towel for Neelix to dry himself. Neelix asks, can this replicator of yours make clothing as well? And he's like, yes, of course. A uniform like yours? No, it absolutely will not. That statement's going to age badly, Tuvok. Neelix gives them the directions to scan to find an encampment down on the surface of the planet. And we get our introduction to Wish.com Klingons, to the Kazon. Do you know what? The Kazon, there was potential. Also, like, as they're walking in, look in the corner, you see two little Kazon raiders just sitting on the sand. I like that. The Kazon are more of a case of they didn't know what to do with them. They had, whatever, look, all aliens look a certain way, that's fine. But yeah, it was like, they were based on LA gangs, according to behind the scenes interviews with Jerry Taylor, Michael Piller, and Rick Berman, who they together made Star Trek Voyager. I get it, because you have the Kazon Ogla in this episode, and okay, temporal observations, but you have other sects like the Kazon Nistrum, for example, would kind of go on to be the biggest antagonist of them. And it just didn't really go anywhere. Even like the most interesting storyline with the Kazon became about a member of Chakotay's crew who betrayed him and then went and joined. It wasn't about the Kazon in particular. They're introduced well, they're clearly desperate, they clearly need water, they're thugs. That's the way they're presented in this one. You get Gavin O'Herlihy playing Jabin. This is interesting, right? Because Gavin O'Herlihy was not the first person cast to play Jabin. Alan Scarf was. You would probably know Alan Scarf for playing the Romulan head of the community in Birthright, where Worf thinks he's going to go find Moog. And he would also return in Star Trek Voyager in the episode Resistance, with the fabulous episode with Joel Grey. It's really, really good. But he filmed scenes as Jabin and was then replaced. There doesn't seem to be any bad blood. As I say, he returned in season 2 of Star Trek Voyager, but I can't find the actual reason why he was swapped out. So if anyone knows, I would love to know. Please do let me know in the comments. But yes, Gavin O'Herlihy, a good Irish name by the way, plays Jabin, who is, according to Neelix, the Magi, later to be pronounced Maj, of the Kazon Ogla. He's the head of the gang, basically. He disarms Janeway, Chakotay, Tuvok, and, well, probably should have disarmed Neelix as well, but he did not. Janeway tries to make peace by having 2 large containers of water beamed down. They've never seen this kind of technology before. And just in the background, you can spot the little blonde head of Jennifer Lien. Janeway does try to say, perhaps we can help each other, and he says, how can we help someone with such technology as that? He does, however, reveal the lifespan of the Ocampa, which are about 9 years, saying they make poor servants. They live in a subterranean lair which is covered by a barrier. And then there's a scene that I do not like. So we see that there's a bruise on, we will learn her name is Kes, on Kes's eye. And Jabin just kind of casually says, you'll get nothing out of that one. I've used every method I can think of to make her speak. Down. There's too much implication in that. I do not like that at all. It's very, as I say, the implication of what Jabin has done to Kes in however long she's been in his captivity. And it's completely glossed over. They never talk about it again. There is no reference to it even after this episode. We learned that basically Neelix more or less tricked Voyager into helping him save Kes from the Kazon, which is, you can kind of understand where he's coming from. They get out of there, he pulls a weapon on Jabin, and, Janeway, they get their weapons and technology back, and then they beam up. And also, it's quite funny, because he then fires at the water tank, and then when it cuts back to you, see it's clearly got a spigot at the bottom of it, but it's fine. And they beam out of there. So basically, they've just made an enemy of the Kazon. But there's some things that don't need to be included, and that would have been one of them. Up on the ship, they're all a bit miffed when they turn around, and there's Neelix saying to Kes, my dear, didn't I promise I'd rescue you? Down on the Ocampa's planet, Kim and Torres are starting to feel the effects of their illness. They're starting to feel pain, that while they're still free to move around, they're trapped by their own bodies. The doctor who was in the room with them earlier on comes up, and she brings them a type of medicine that was made by Ocampa who have left the compound. She reveals that there are ways out, even though everything is supposed to be sealed over by a barrier, there are ways out of this compound. So she says, after a bit of back and forth, that yes, she can help them, and that it's probably going to take them a couple of days to dig through rock to get out of there, but yes, she can point them in the right direction. Okie dokie, away we go. Up in sickbay, you have the doctor whisking away Kes's black eye with a dermal regenerator. And then we get another scene of everyone being rude to the doctor when he says, everyone please leave, my patients need rest. And Janeway's like, cool story, computer deactivate EMH. Down. Yes, they're all so rude in this episode. Kes quickly speaks up for herself. She asks them not to blame Neelix for tricking them. That, she says, it was my fault. She's kind of stepping into the breach here to take responsibility. But she also very quickly then turns around and says, we will do whatever we can to help you save your people. At this point, Neelix is not really on board. He's like, no, we're going to go. That's the end of it. Thanks very much. And she's like, come on. They helped you. We've got to help them. Up. I like this part of Kes's character. Obviously, look, there is a whole essay and a half to talk about Kes and how the character was not used. But as little as we get of her in the pilot, I do quite like her here. Very quickly, she brings them down to one of these gardens that the doctor was talking about a moment ago, with a bunch of other Ocampa who've kind of left that, left the compound, but not so far that they're trying to get up to the surface either. Because there's a bit of back and forth where Kes is, kind of the defiant one, saying that we've been reliant on the Caretaker for so long, we've forgotten how to live ourselves. There's also the tease for the Ocampa's abilities could be an awful lot more than they have, that they've stopped using some of them. That's a tease for things to come. Downstairs, for want of a better word, Kim and Torres get to the bottom of a stairwell. They have no digging equipment. So have they dug their way through and have now found the stairwell, or are they due to, at the top of the stairwell, dig their way through? We do see later on Paris using a phaser to get through some rock. So I don't know if it was a continuity error or what, but yeah, anyway, they start climbing, and time is a little bit confusing at this part of the episode. Who is where, when, and how long has it taken them to get there? We get a moment of bonding between Torres and Kim. Kim is starting to feel it a little bit. He's like, kind of, I can't believe it. I spent my whole life trying to join Starfleet, and on my first mission, I'm gonna die. Torres reveals that she was a second-year cadet before the mutual decision that Starfleet wasn't for her. She talks about Commander Zakarian, Sneezy, who was allergic to everything, and they bond, both going that, yeah, we knew him, we didn't like him. It's a nice moment of bonding between the two. It is bullying, but yeah, up there. They can also hear and feel that the pulses coming from the Caretaker's array are definitely speeding up. It's also just that I love, right, so the Ocampa's compound was filmed in the LA Convention Center. And it's just so fun seeing Janeway, Chakotay, Tuvok, just on an escalator. Why not? Why wouldn't you? I just think it looks fun. Tuvok reckons he's twigged what's going on with the pulses. He refers to the fact that the Caretaker said, I don't have much time. They now know that the pulses are energy pulses and that the city has got about 5 years of energy now stored. He thinks the Caretaker's dying, that he was providing for the Ocampa, he knew he was dying, and that's what the increased energy and looking for a replacement was about. I will give you an up, sir, for good reasoning. Janeway asks a very pertinent question. If he dies, how the hell are we supposed to get home? Everything's going to kind of converge on the stairwell now. So you've got Paris, Kes, and Neelix. They come to the stairwell. Yeah, because, right, so this is obviously a different route, because they went through the garden, down into the convention, not the convention center, it's the real life, into the Ocampa's compound, and are now effectively chasing Kim and Torres. So you've got Paris, Kes, and Neelix are at the bottom of the stairwell. Janeway says, right, you get them, we'll meet you on the ship, meaning herself, Tuvok, and Chakotay. They go to beam out, they can't, the barrier is stopping that from happening. And so too are the increased pulses from the array. I like to think that this is kind of how they tested the actors for their endurance skills. I think they just made them climb the staircase over and over again. And yeah, do you know what? I actually fully believe that. So you have Garrett Wang and Roxanne Dawson, who are just like really tired sitting on the staircase. I think they just made them climb it over and over again. That group meets up. Janeway messaged them, so they said, look, we can't beam, so we're behind you. Don't wait for us. You just go. There's just a little friendly moment where Harry turns around to Paris and says, took you long enough. Up. As they're escaping this part, Paris just fires his phaser at a rockfall, because what could possibly go wrong? Down. There's a funny thing, right? So again, as I say, I was watching this on Paramount Plus UK and Ireland, and I'm certain there's a scene missing, because I have a crystal clear memory of Kes trying desperately not to be hit by the force field. That scene's not in the episode. Suddenly we're just on the surface, and then you have them kind of arriving up onto the surface. You have Neelix and Paris then elect to go back down and help the rest of the crew escape. But yeah, I just thought it was funny. Like, hang on, I know I've seen that. But yeah, fun thing. It's also not the only scene that's missing from the Paramount Plus one. The energy pulses have changed to effectively weapons bursts. The Caretaker's trying to seal all of the entrances to make sure that the Kazon can't effectively take over the Ocampa. And there is one moment where it impacts, and it does look pretty bad, to be fair. Chakotay and Tuvok are hit by falling rock, and also the staircase itself is starting to get damaged. Paris and Neelix get back, they help Janeway get out, they help Tuvok get out, but Paris is like, right, I'm gonna save Chakotay. Chakotay's like, well, my leg's broke. What is it with Star Trek and broken bridges and really kind of freaking us out? Remember, this is not that long after Generations, and we all know what happened with a broken bridge in Generations. Paris kind of jibes Chakotay a little bit. It's like, you know, kind of, oh, by the way, if I save your butt, your life belongs to me. Isn't that an Indian custom? And Chakotay says, wrong tribe. Okay, we're going to do it. We're going to talk about Jamaki Highwater. When creating the character of Chakotay for Star Trek Voyager, the producers and the writers reached out to a Native American consultant who went by the name of Jamake Highwater. This person was to make sure that the representation of Indigenous Americans was handled well in Star Trek Voyager. There was a bit of a problem. The problem was Mr. Highwater had been exposed as a fraud before he was hired on Voyager. It was a matter of public record that his claims to have been of Indigenous ancestry and a lot of his expertise were fraudulent, allegedly, because I don't want to get sued. Again, this was a matter of public record. So he was hired with this knowledge available. So there is an awful lot of just mixing and matching and throwing together bits from different Indigenous American tribes into this sort of melting pot that ended up being Chakotay. And sadly, the legacy of that is that Chakotay is almost a byword for bad representation. This is not to do with Robert Beltran. It's more to do with, the writing of the character and how the character's arc was handled. There's jokes here about, can you turn into a bird and fly us away? I could look at that and think, well, on the surface, that's just a sort of an off-the-cuff joke by Paris. It just kind of, the high water of it all sort of taints any mention of Indigenous American customs, and yeah, it makes for a bit of an odd experience watching Voyager back. We'll just say this. None of the scenes with Chakotay, particularly referencing anything to do with Indigenous Americans, have aged well. Paris does get him out of there. They're all back up on the ship, which is grand. Doctor does his job. I'm sure there's probably racial slurs thrown at the Doctor in this scene, because why wouldn't there be? They all, as quickly as possible, get out of sickbay, and the Doctor turns around to Harry Kim and says, "Is the crew always this difficult?" And Harry says, "I wouldn't know, Doc. It's my first mission." And everyone leaves, and there's just another shot of, doesn't anyone know how to turn off a program when they leave? Chakotay beams back aboard the Maquis Raider, which means there is 2 ships for the Kazon to attack. Those Kazon Raiders are actually, I like them. I think I didn't love them when I was watching them first of all, but actually they look mean, they look fast, and they look dangerous with how quickly they move, and I really like them. Jabin, unfortunately, just seems like a bit of an idiot. I have an issue with anyone that would challenge us. All right, okay. Shut up, Jabin. We get our very first, yes, ma'am, up. Yeah, Robert Duncan McNeil just having a lot of fun when Janeway says, "Take the con." Yeah, I don't know, I like that. Tuvok and Janeway beam over to the array. The clock is really ticking now. They need to get through to the Caretaker because they need the technology to get home again. The Caretaker again is like, "Oh, really, are you back? Go away." There's sad banjo music playing and it's nighttime over there. Symbolism. The Caretaker's sort of laughing. Again, you can see that they're not on the same level. Janeway says, "We need you to send us home." And he's like, "I just don't have time." He then explains, "We're from another galaxy." I love the through line of how many extragalactic things happen in pilots of Star Trek. Just throwing it out there. He reveals that they, the Sporocystian life forms, had no idea that their technology would be so destructive to the atmosphere of the Ocampa's planet, so that he and another, a female caretaker, if you like, were left behind to care for them, but she kind of booked it out of there after a while. Oh, don't worry. We see her in a later episode. And there's a great exchange between Janeway and the Caretaker where he says the Ocampa are children, they need to be cared for. And Janeway counters with, "Children have to learn how to be self-sufficient. Children have to grow up." Up. She talks about the challenge of growing up forces them to evolve. Outside, what we have is the arrival of the huge Kazon Predator class ships. Yeah, they're big, these ones. And yeah, Voyager suddenly is pretty overpowered. And then we get, I know why they did it, but it's annoying that they had to destroy the Maquis Raider the way that they did. It was because they were going to force the crews together. That was always going to be the plan. I completely understand the logic of it. It's just frustrating. You know what I mean? Like, it was 2 cool ships. Oh, and also, Chakotay did not need to sit in the pilot seat for as long as he did. Damn. It does, though, his suicide run, well, sort of, into the Predator class ship causes it to crash into the Caretaker's array, snapping off one of the spines, if you will. Harry signals over to say that, no, everyone's fine. This is what's happened. There's been a collision. This causes the holographic technology on the Caretaker's array to start failing, and we see the Blob. Or the true form of the Sporocystian life form. One of them. He reveals that although he had set a self-destruct for the array, that's now been damaged. The Kazon must not be allowed to have this technology. They will destroy the Ocampa. He then dies, becomes a rock. Can't wait to tell my friends. They don't have a rock this big. The stage has been set. The stakes are high. Janeway knows what has to be done. Tuvok says, "Yes, look, I have the technology here. We can send us home again." Janeway's like, "Yeah, can't do it." Tuvok gently reminds her that any action they take to help the Ocampa is going to affect the balance of power in this quadrant. The Prime Directive would seem to apply. Oh, that's not cold. That's just logical. Janeway then counters with, whether we like it or not, we're already involved. She's right. Up. They beam back aboard Voyager and she hails Jabin, telling him to move his ships to a safe distance, that she plans to destroy the array. And B'Elanna calls her right the hell out. Up. She says, who the hell is she to make these kind of decisions? And Chakotay goes, she's the captain. I'll get to it in the Temporal. We fire TrekCulture devices at the Caretaker's array. They make a nice big boom. That's a pretty impressive explosion. That is an up to me there. Here's the other scene that's missing from this episode on Paramount+. Jabin then contacts them to say, you have made an enemy today. That scene's not in the one on Paramount+. Probably to do with maybe it's runtime, to do with the fact that it's split into 2 episodes. But yeah, I just thought it was so odd. And also, what random choices to take out of the episode. And that really is that. The next thing then we see is Paris reporting to Janeway's ready room, where Janeway reveals that she's going to make the Maquis part of the Starfleet crew. She also gives Paris a field commission of lieutenant, and that he will be assigned to the con. And this is a lovely moment, because you can see how genuinely affected by this he is. We also get the reveal of his middle name, Thomas Eugene Paris. The whole scene, including his joke about a life debt with Chakotay, is an up to me. Then Neelix and Kes rush in as well, and here's sort of what I was saying about. In Neelix, we get a rundown of all of the things that he will do for the ship. He's going to be a cook, he's going to be a guide, he can do supplies, like he can be the person, and Kes is also there. Unfortunately, that would become a running theme for Neelix and Kes. Then we get the speech. I love the speech, and we all love the speech at the end of Caretaker, where Janeway talks about how they've made friends and enemies, and how they're 75,000 light years away from home, how they're in the Delta Quadrant. Thank you for finally saying so. Seriously, that's right, the end of the episode is where they identify the Delta Quadrant. Kate Mulgrew delivers this perfectly. I don't think this is going to be any shock. My latinum up for Caretaker is Kate Mulgrew. She speaks about both crews learning to survive, that herself and Chakotay have agreed it will be one crew, a Starfleet crew, with Chakotay serving as the first officer. We will find throughout the run of season 1 how the rest of the Maquis crew will integrate into the Starfleet crew. And then we get a lovely little nod to the TOS theme, which talks about seeking out new life and new civilizations. We get some teases for what's to come. She says, at our maximum speed, it will take 75 years to get back to the Federation, but I'm not willing to wait that long. There's another entity like the Caretaker out there. We'll look for wormholes, spatial anomalies, whatever we can to cut the journey down. She says, somewhere along the way, we'll find a way home. Mr. Paris, set course for home. We get that last shot of Voyager sitting there with the nacelles raising up. Would you join me, please, at Temporal observations? I like this one, I'm not gonna lie. Right, so that opening text scroll, like I said, directly referencing Emissary from Deep Space Nine as well. The Maquis Raider, which is named the Valjean, very much following along with the theme of the Maquis. We would see that brought up again over on Deep Space Nine with the character of Michael Eddington. Gulivek, who returns from Deep Space Nine as well as this, but also that shot would be used in episodes like Call to Arms, with the torpedoes firing at the Cardassian ship, and later on with that impact on the blade, that is directly used again in, for example, Call to Arms. The interior of the Maquis ship, I mean, that's just a redressed runabout as well. But also, the LCARs are they're kind of the blue and green from the Lost era, as opposed to the more colorful, up-to-date ones that we see on Voyager and contemporary Starfleet ships. Keep an eye out, it's really, really blurry, but there is a Maquis symbol on the wall behind Tuvok. And also, when you look at that panel and you see the displacement wave gathering behind the Maquis Raider as well, the graphic is the Academy flight ship that was used in the episode The First Duty of the Next Generation. It feels like almost a future egg, if you like, using New Zealand here in this episode, because, as I say, New Zealand just isn't apparently part of Earth anymore by Star Trek First Contact. Nick Locarno. So it's sort of a, as I say, the behind the scenes Some will say it's an urban myth that they didn't want to pay for the rights to the character of Nick Locarno for every episode of Voyager. Others will say, no, it was never going to be that. It was a Nick Locarno type character. Could they get someone like Robert Duncan McNeil from the first duty? Until someone said, well, why don't we just see if Robert Duncan McNeil is free? Which they then did. You can see then the inspiration for the character of Paris. There's a lot of crossover, caused an accident, somebody died, but it's not quite the same. It's just different enough. And also, just funnily enough, when we go forward all the way to the 6th season and we meet Admiral Paris in person, there's a photo on his desk in, I believe it's Pathfinder. That photo is Nick Locarno from the first duty. Janeway saying that she knew Admiral Paris prior to this, serving aboard the USS Al-Batani. If you read the autobiography of Captain Catherine Janeway, written by Dr. Una McCormack, you will see all of that backstory. The only thing then that doesn't really settle up is that in that story, she also knew Tom. She had met Tom before, so it doesn't really match up with what we see here in the episode. She's very much introducing herself to Tom here. There's a fun little Easter egg as Stadi is bringing Paris to Voyager for the first time. Because of course that shuttle, where have we seen it the most times? Star Trek The Next Generation. First shot we see of it, it's got Voyager's registry on the side of it, 74656. However, when you see it flying around Deep Space Nine beginning its ascent to Voyager, what does it say on the side? 1701D, thrown in as a little Easter egg for The Next Generation. As I say, the inclusion of Quark and Morn just continues that tradition of having someone there to do a handover. My ire toward Mark, oh, he's nice really. Well, there's sort of a how long did people wait before giving up on Voyager as destroyed? And I think in fairness, he did wait longer than some. The most important thing is I hope he just took care of Molly, the Red Setter, for all of her life. And she's a good girl, and she's wonderful. And that's the most important thing, and that's all I'll say about that. Crewman Rollins, who's in this episode, is played by Scott MacDonald. He would go on. I think one of the biggest roles he played is as the Xindi reptilian Dolan in Star Trek Enterprise's 3rd season. That's him, underneath the makeup. He's also played Romulans from time to time as well. He was in Face of the Enemy, for example, with Deanna Troi when she was somewhat unexpectedly found undercover with the Tal Shiar. The funny inconsistency, if you like, with some of the technology in Star Trek Voyager is that, yes, as I mentioned earlier on, TNG-era tricorders, TNG-era phasers, they would quite quickly be phased out for the more up-to-date Deep Space Nine with the, for example, the curved handle phaser and the smaller, more compact tricorder as well. There's also, that's a guy that sort of follows into the 3rd season because you have this compression phaser rifle, which is unique to Voyager. However, somehow they managed to get their hands on some of the phaser rifles that were introduced in Star Trek First Contact after Voyager was lost in the Delta Quadrant. There's a sort of an ongoing joke behind the scenes like, they were just in a storage locker, shut up. The first ever mention of Sporocystian life forms are in this episode. They would return in the episode Cold Fire of the 2nd season of Star Trek Voyager. There with Gary Graham, who we would go on to know as Soval, plays Tanith, an Ocampa who's about 14 years old in that episode, because the Sporocystian female caretaker, known as Suspiria, for all of you Argento fans out there, has helped them expand their abilities. It's actually quite an unsettling episode. We get one of our 47 jokes in this. So you probably know at this stage that 47 is sort of the magic number in Star Trek. Particularly, I think it was Joe Minosky who might be most directly responsible for bringing all these 47 jokes in. He joked that 47 is just the number 42, adjusted for inflation. And of course we all know what the number 42 is. It's the answer to life, the universe, and everything. Tuvok says that, there's intervals of 0.47 seconds. I mentioned earlier, of course, that Neelix asked if he can have a Starfleet uniform. Tuvok seems dead against it. Well, I'll give it time. He definitely gets a uniform a few times throughout Voyager, actually. He wears the gold uniform most regularly. Think about Year of Hell, for example, when he gets drafted into the security division. The Kazon Ogla are the Kazon sect introduced in this episode. We would go on to meet the Nistrum along with several others as well. As I mentioned earlier, they were based on gangs and gang warfare. Sadly, I don't think the desired effect was achieved with all of the different Kazon sects, but you can certainly see what they were going for. The tri-cobalt devices that are used here to destroy the Caretaker's array are interesting because, one, they are not normal technology, and you're left for a couple of seasons going, why didn't they just use them? They seem to be much more powerful than torpedoes. Surely this is a good bit of technology to have. Why did we use our entire supply in this episode? That is addressed in the later episode of the Voyager conspiracy, where 7 of 9 goes down a bit of a rabbit hole and, asks the question, hey, what's with those tri-cobalt devices? What's that about? The big thing then is the unification of the two crews, so Starfleet and Maquis. One of the most interesting things when crafting Star Trek Voyager was this idea that there would be two separate crews learning how to work together on board the one ship. Sadly, they abandoned that almost immediately. At the end of Caretaker, they're fine, they're all wearing the same uniform, but you could easily say, well, that doesn't necessarily make them part of the crew. I mean, it does and it doesn't. But so quickly they sort of abandon that. You do get a little bit in season 1 of people adjusting, B'Elanna, adjusting to how things are done in a Starfleet engineering. You get the whole reveal of Seska. You get then, things like State of Flux, and then later on Learning Curve. So it is addressed in season 1, but it is absolutely not a major plot point. It is not something that they really properly explored. You get a tease of it in season 4 when they finally make contact with Starfleet again, and they ask the question, how are the Maquis crew members getting up? And Janeway says, I'd stopped thinking of you as them. You weren't the only one, Captain. It is sadly a missed opportunity of Voyager, because Voyager very quickly found itself becoming not a clone of the Next Generation, because it still had its own unique identity, but much closer to the Next Generation than I think needed to be done. I still really enjoy the show, all 7 seasons of it. It was a success, and it helped launch the UPN network, or that's like saying ATM machine. But yes, this was a big deal. This episode launched a network, and there was micromanaging. Poor Kate Mulgrew talked about how there was producers on set nearly every day during filming, which doesn't normally happen because everyone was so concerned with getting this right. There was so much pressure. They obviously kept messing with her hair for the first season as well. And there were many mistakes, I think, made throughout Voyager's first year in particularly. Some well-meaning and some there was definitely misogyny going into the making of this show. There was an awful lot of goodwill and sometimes not translating into the finished result. Again, don't get me wrong, big Voyager fan. I think that it did a lot. I think it's hardly controversial to say that they never got there with the character of Kes. We now know that there was a lot of behind the scenes issues, because poor Jennifer Leon dealt with an awful lot of demons while filming this show, and that apparently translated over into the work that was being done. If you get a chance, in fact, I highly recommend reading Nana Visitor's book, Open a Channel, The Women of Star Trek. Although Jennifer Leon is not interviewed for the book, there is discussions with her castmates about what it was like working with her. It is very, very interesting and definitely worth a read. The last thing before we finish up there is Mr. Harris set a course for home is, of course, the final line of Endgame as well. Duncan Rillick, no relation, and I collect relics from before the burn. Thanks to a temporal wormhole, I now have an unlimited supply of TrekCulture t-shirts, and I'm selling them to you! You could be wearing this stylish down and up t-shirt. Or, how about this fish watching design? Bright yellow on black, the colors I'd use in thumbnails, I tell you that for nothing. I plan to take these designs and transfer them via quantum duplication onto hats, mugs, and posters. So look out for those. Ah! Treat this unlimited supply as a limited time deal. Get your t-shirt quick. Who's your daddy? And that is everything for our video today, folks. Thank you so much for watching along. We hope that you enjoyed this one. I hope you didn't mind that I'm not Ellie. You are awesome and you are wonderful. Thank you everyone who is following the retro ups and downs and who is showing love and support. Massively, massively appreciated. Please, if you haven't already, please click like, share and subscribe. That makes such a difference. And also, if you really could, if you could share these as well, that would really, really be helpful. Thank you so much. Remember, folks, that we still have our ups and downs for Star Trek Can, which are available on all decent podcast catchers, so you can catch those. As of the release of this, there's one episode left of Star Trek Can, the 9th and final episode. You can catch all that as well. Look after yourselves until I see you again. Please make sure you're following us on the various socials. We're at TrekCulture, at TrekCultureYT on Instagram. I am at Sean Ferrick. And don't forget to follow Eddie as well over on Instagram at e.d_r.u.o.k. I love that handle. You are awesome and wonderful. Until I see you again, look after yourselves, be kind to yourselves, put that kindness out in the world, put peace out in the world. It is a shock and scary time to be living on Earth at the moment, so try and do what you can to make your own life a little bit better, but also to try and make the people around you's life a little bit better as well. Live long and prosper, my friends. To everyone in Palestine, the Sudan and Congo, we are sending peace your way. We love you. Everyone in Ukraine, we love you. Thank you so much. Talk to you soon.